Welcome back to the Teacher's AI Cafe. I'm Kane, a teacher and a parent who wants AI to give us back our time. I share practical classroom-tested AI strategies to cut down your workload, improve your feedback and reduce stress so you can get your evenings back and be more present with your friends and family. No jargon, just actionable steps. Grab your mug. Now let's get going. Welcome back to today's podcast. So I was at a PD the other day, another one. We do these as educators. One of the questions, I was at a university here in Western Australia, which is Murdoch, and they had a psychology professor get up and talk. And he put the question to the room, which I thought was quite appropriate, given this podcast topic, as what do you do about AI in education? How do you adapt it? And he was asking for what response you do for students using AI. And he went through an example where he had this fictitious student used AI and pretty much did his entire assignment using AI and ran through the different model. And this was a university level task there. And he put the question, how do we actually deal with that? And the majority of the answers were go back to pen and paper, accountability, look for AI checkers, all the pretty much standard reaction or response. Now I piped and put my hand up was simply integrate AI into the assessment program. Acknowledge that they use it and teach them how to do it properly, which he quite liked because it led into his whole talk. His whole talk was essentially about integrating AI into programs and how they're doing it at university level. And what he showed was actually really, really good. He went through assignments where they're allowed to use AI, assignments where they're not allowed to use AI, but they need to lodge articulate what they've actually done and actually get feedback. And they did this study around that. And he was saying at the university, they've got options, lecturers, some people don't use it at all, other people use it a lot. The idea is integrating it and making it obviously that you're using AI in the system when you're doing your studies and how to actually use it effectively and get really good answers. And I think that's actually a brilliant answer. Hopefully I'll get him on the podcast. I had a chat to him afterwards about it because I'd love to hear his ideas and get out there. And that sort of brings me into one of, I guess, wrongly or rightly, one of the poster childs of AI in secondary or middle school programs or organisations that actually exist. So we're going to talk about this school, and this is based on a report that actually came out by 404 Media. So when a school charges the price of a small car, and that leads us in today's topic, what I'm going to talk about. So when a school charges the price of a small car each year, and if we're looking at Australian cars, expensive cars, I guess it's selling more than a timetable. It sells a story about what education can become. And what school I'm talking about is Alpha School. It's been promoted sometimes glowingly as an education model for the future. And I've spoken about them beforehand. 2 hours of core academics on an adaptive platform, so they adjust to where the student are. Fantastic. And then long afternoons devoted to life skills projects, workshop, more like the old guilds where you learned your specialist knowledge from experts, because obviously there's teachers not in the system. There's guides, there's experts. And the idea is you can build I love the term Renaissance type education where you do a bit of everything and you get a nice broad skills so you can apply that then specialize in one area and developing those life skills and things like that. And I think the model is absolutely brilliant. I think this would be a fantastic model for education, and I'll put that up front. But how well is Alpha actually doing it? Because Alpha's published tuitions, and I've mentioned this before, apparently if you're in New York, it's like $65,000 a year, $75,000 in San Francisco. Was it Palo Alto? I think I pronounced that right. Multiple campuses sort of listed. So that this model is spreading. And I guess for me in Australia, that's what we consider a private school model where you pay a lot of money to get this certification. And they describe it as a teacherless model, replacing teachers with the guides. Obviously, that's great if you're doing, you're doing some hands-on project, like you want to be a bricklayer or whatever. You got experienced bricklayers running it. That's absolutely perfect. And the idea of the academics is done around a computer instructions for people who don't know. There's machine learning built in and it monitors student progress. So, but there's been, obviously because it's this model put up, there's been a lot of articles and research starting to happen around this organisation in terms of effectiveness and actually how it operates. And I'm not picking on this specifically. I'm actually putting in this context as an educator. What does this show that we can actually do to advance education beyond the model or the industrial model that we actually use at the moment. So things like Business Insider, 404 Media have been doing some sort of investigative reports. And I thought I'd do this podcast because a 404 Media report just came out. It's actually really good reading. So Business Insider praised the Alpha as a promising better use of teachers' time. I do agree with that, arguing AI could handle routine instructions where adult focus hands-on and social development. So 404 Media published an investigation based on interviews, leaked documents from former employees. So these, when they didn't get answers direct from the organisation, we need to put that in the context of the claims they're actually making. But its central claim was not simply that Alpha uses AI apps, which obviously the public said, but the internal machinery behind the model may be far messier than the public pitch, with the potential implications to things like quality, intellectual property, as well as student privacy. And this is probably where the concern comes in. So these people have come up with the model, they've rolled it out, it's been successful, but behind the scenes, maybe it's not the case. It's like Waymo announcing recently that there's actually, I think it was the Philippines, there's groups of humans in the Philippines that help their self-driving taxis when they get stuck. So there's still an element of human interaction. It's not a completely autonomous system. No, it seems so, the person sitting in the car where there's no driver. So the two tasks for educators listening today. First, is what we want to do is separate the public documents that from what is alleged. And second is to ask what must be true ethically, educationally, before any system is held up as, I guess, being the future of education. Because on the surface, it looks like a fantastic model. So we'll begin with the public-facing model. So Alpha's own program markets 2 hours of learning a day framed with accelerated mastery through AI technology, followed by afternoons of workshops, real-world skills. Washington Post reported Virginia expansion describes the same structure, 2 hours of core academics, using adaptive apps and personalised lesson plans. Fantastic. Then afternoon skills for things like, they say, financial literacy with guides, not teachers. Also notes the crucial distinction the Alpha co-founder told the Post that the curriculum was not generated by generative AI chatbots and that the system relied on adaptive platforms and machine learning for personalisation. So it's not a chatbot actually run the education. Now, when we look at 404's media investigation that's just come out, it alleges that internally automation plays a larger role in generating lessons and questions than the public narrative suggests, and the quality control can fail in ways that land directly in front of students. So obviously, maybe that sounds like they don't have a good vetting process before it actually reaches the student. So if that allegation is accurate, and it's only an allegation, it raises more of a straightforward classroom question. When software generates learning materials at scale, who is accountable for the accuracy, misconception, bias, and the subtle craft of actually sequencing the knowledge? Now, in terms of sequencing the knowledge, I think AI can do that very well. But it's really looking at the accuracy and misconceptions coming into the system, depending on where they get the content from. And that is a concern there because you don't have that professional judgment. And that's not really an abstract issue because the supporting evidence about the school's surveillance capacity is not leaked. It's published on Alpha itself. So obviously to do this, run these programs, they need to monitor what the students actually do. So, and Alpha itself states that through the educational success of its technology relies on extensive data collection. So things like recorded sessions, screenshots, tracking keyboard, mouse activity, use of webcams, microphones, with potential collection of biometrics and geolocation tracking on school premises. Stop. Seem to be a bit croaky this morning. So the Post separately reports that Alpha uses AI to monitor things like attentiveness. I guess like, when you're in the car, you take your eyes off the road, it beeps at you nowadays. But this including recording screen activity and monitoring keystrokes, and that a coaching tool prompts students when they rush or lose focus. And that's a good thing. Particularly if you get someone jumps on and goes click, 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 and doesn't actually really learn. So Alpha linked products also signal the direction of travel. So Study Rule, described as an AI learning system, advertises vision-based time tracking and optional microphone and camera recordings for deeper insights. I guess even a support article on Alpha's site describes different systems tracking student activity through what amounts to persistent observation, albeit in a child-friendly tone. And I guess this is saying, not knowing the model, is there, I guess, no one is actually present with their students when they're actually doing this particular work, which is fantastic if a student is self-motivated to actually sit and do the work. And I know some of the students I've experienced over my years of teaching, they just won't do anything. They'll find something else to do. Anyway, so if we pause there for a moment, we think this is the, point where education, stop thinking like consumers and start thinking, like duty holders. What are you actually responsible for? A school collecting things like screen recording, audio, video, and so productivity metrics and putting it online actually creates a high-risk environment by definition. I know in the Australian school system, but particularly the public, privacy is a big issue and how we record. So even if the intention is benign, the simple fact there's so much sensitive data getting recorded on these students, if mistakes happen, the consequences can actually be quite large. So this is why the 404 media reporting has raised some alarms around this. Some students recording and identifying information were accessible by a broadly shared link. So the information is not secure actually going on there, and that's not good. So it's something they really got to look into if you're going along this type of system. The second set, and this is with AI General, it simply involves intellectual property. The report, widely summarised by education commenters, suggests that internal scraping of curriculum materials and unauthorised copying of or white labelling of other platforms. So public alpha affiliated materials do include references to the so-called NICE Academy, which is the minimum confirms that the label exists within its own ecosystem, though it's not itself the proof that it's actually cloning other people's systems, such as Khan Academy, and then feeding it into their school. Well, you need to, Khan's free anyway. So for schools, the practical use is simple, If a vendor's pipeline depends on scraping and using other people's work without clear licensing, it becomes a legal and ethical risk over time because it travels through the school and the families, and the children are placed inside that ecosystem. They're affected by that. And the issue is, what is it actually scraping and getting? What is the vetting process? It's getting that and then feeding it in. Hopefully they've got educators reviewing. And the last, the third concern really is about the student experience and well-being. And this is the big debate, and there's a lot of debate coming out, obviously, from different educators and researchers about just screen time or IT in general within schools. They're tracking since digital devices have been introduced that IQ scores are declining, and then technology is obviously to blame, or that's the way it's getting taken. And I'm seeing some reactions of that here already. For example, a local school in the area have decided not to continue with their bring your own device program, and they're going to go back to more pen and paper and use computer labs to control it. But if you bring a device into the school, it's up to the teachers and the systems how you actually use it, the mixing device use, as well as obviously doing traditional pen and paper, group discussion, all those other activities. They don't just sit there all day typing on a computer. Well, they don't in my class or the schools I've been at. We mix lots of activities in there because we have a good, well-rounded, structured program that uses technology as a tool. But I digress. So in terms of, 404 media and wider reported that parents and former staff described high stress, anxiety, and intense pressure to meet software-defined metrics, including reward systems that penalise slower learners. So whether this is more of a general reporting of actually what's happening or whether it's a widespread event, it supports the essential corrective. Let's switch it. It supplies, a bit of a corrective to the promotional videos. Classroom reality of the metric-driven system feels less like curiosity, more like compliance. I do understand why, obviously, they've been given a 2-hour block to achieve whatever the set metrics were. And obviously, the system then tries to keep them to that. Now, I do agree with that because I saw a fantastic thing the other day. Some people's their teachers, that was a meme, and where'd they go? I'll have to look it up. That's Start again. So I saw this great meme that sort of summed that up. It went like this. To the world, you may just be a teacher, but to your students, you're an annoying person trying to make them to do stuff. And I thought it was quite appropriate and quite funny. But at the same time, obviously the AI system is doing that. But obviously the AI system, when it does that, it's doing that in a way that may not have that human relation, building that rapport, building that relationship and that trust to actually, and then explaining why they need to do it or the pace or what they're actually getting out of it. Whereas whatever system they may have in there is sort of pushing their students. And I think pushing students is really important. But at the same time, it's how you do it. That's part of our skill as educators. But if it's something that's creating things like anxiety and stress within the students, depending on their age group, that's not a good thing. Because that, over the long time, that would have the opposite effect of what they're actually trying to achieve. And I guess this puts in the place of terms what measurement is. See, it's not like schools are call centres where children are not remote learning. And things like rewards and nudges need to become the default behaviour technology. There's the risk of that is that schooling becomes a factory for compliance rather than a community for formation. So you're changing one sort of industrial model compliance, which is a bit more flexible, into one that's driven by AI. On the flip side of that, you've got all this additional time to do their projects, but at the same time, you're creating this 2-hour block of very intense instruction. So Wired, in their reports accounts, stress and pressure should be read at a minimum as a warning of unintended consequences coming out of a system like this. Now, it's not to say they haven't got internal processes and conversations that the students can talk about or adjust their rate of learning, I guess, and who really is defining those expectations? I assume the educators in the organisation are. But how much control does the machine and AI learning have to actually push those students? Because they might be very quick in the beginning, and then as they get more complex, they may slow down. Is the system expecting them to keep running at the same pace they were when they were going through foundational or easier work? So what should educators do with all this? Especially when, I guess, policymakers and philanthropists, I can't say the word, really rich people who push these sort of programs. And it's not the first and it might be the last, who say alpha is actually the blueprint of the future. So I guess we want to think about looking around at, a pedagogy checklist. One applies to any AI-enabled platform, not only alpha. So we really want evidence-based information coming out of this. And at the moment, as with all things, we're getting lots of testimonials. That's like a sales site. So we need independent evaluation, studies done, and things like the demographics of the sales attrition rate, what outcomes are measured beyond the test scores. The post itself flags the difficulty of generalising from a private setting with curated enrolment, because obviously the people coming into very expensive schools are a certain type of student from a certain type of family. We need to map exactly what the data is collected, stored and shared, and why Alpha's published policies is unusually explicit. Should prompt scrutiny, with any vendor or organisation in terms of recording screenshots, what they're doing of our students. We need to interrogate monitoring as a pedagogical choice and not a technical feature. The system tracks attention, nudges behaviour, which is in itself is fine. What theory of learning is it assuming that's happening in the background, or is it basing its decision on? And what alternatives exist for building self-regulation without surveillance in the students themselves as well as the system? Ask about content provenance and licensing. Where are they getting any of the content from? Now that they've got a very large business model, and it is a business, I think they would be subject to potentially different laws as opposed to a pure educational organisation. I guess what we need is to clarify the role of adults or teachers within the organisation. So if the model removes academic teaching from teachers in the room, as reported by the Business Insider, how do misconceptions are handled in real time? How much discussion is actually built into it? Because to me, talking is the best way the learn and reinforce and work through ideas. And how does the school prevent learning from being a solitary, a screen-based activity once outside the other passion projects they're actually talking about? And the last one is things like protecting equity. So the high fees of Alpha make it not representation of, I guess, what we class as public schooling in the public sector. If a model depends on intensive data collection on paid platforms, capacity to replicate at scale becomes doubtful. And we get this widening inequity. It's almost like the old days where people with money would be tutored and the other people would just go off to work. I mean, we're talking a long time ago in history. So the idea of money and influence can create natural advantages for our students. I was reading a report that the US has shown that has the lowest level of social mobility due to education in the OECD, whereas I know in Australia we've got a very high social mobility for people coming through our school system, so you can move different classes and jobs very, very easily. So how are we going to wrap this up? So Alpha School is being promoted as a model for the future because it offers a simple promise. Faster academics, fewer teachers and more time. Given the teacher shortage, that is a good thing. Yet schooling is not merely, transfer information and time saved. It's not automatically well spent. And I think about it in terms of this model, if you look at the modern classroom, which is a model I really like, which is mastery, and they move through different points. In this case, I made all the resources in my implementation of it. Today, I could use AI to do it. And the idea is mastery sort of working through. And the model is very similar, but we're using AI to drive it and machine learning. So we want to make sure the future is not decided by who can automate the most worksheets. And education is more than that. Should be decided by educators who insist on a model of learning that remains, human. It's got to be vigorous, obviously safe, and actually meets and develops the skills our students need to work in a very evolving and obviously highly technological world that they're actually moving into. So almost every role has technology in it now, in one form or another. So if Alpha is the future, then educators must demand proof that it actually works well. So we need, we need those external studies, academic studies come in looking at them. And I guess we'll see where it goes from there. Because things like online incentives, surveillance tools, automated pipelines are already being offered in a lot of different things, usually under friendly branding. But at the same time, there's actually concerns within that. So I hope you found this useful. If you've been to Alpha School or actually worked there or were as a student there, I'd love to hear your thoughts, what it was actually like. Like I said, all this is based on reporting from people outside the organisation and reading the actual information on the school's site itself. I do say, as I said at the beginning, I think the model and the idea has got great potential. How it's done in practice, there are obviously some concerns coming there. But until you see something firsthand, you can't tell. So hopefully we get more information, whether this is successful or not, whether there's something we can roll out more. Because a lot of the focus around that we see at the moment is, and my podcast as well, is helping teachers to navigate the world of AI and use it effectively to benefit their students. We are getting to a point where we're going to need to actually, how we're going to integrate it effectively, as the person at Murdoch University said at the beginning, into our programs, that becomes a tool that's acknowledged but used correctly as well. So until next time, keep up the good work in classroom, keep experimenting with what you're doing, and any questions, hit me up in an email. I'm getting a few lately, which is fantastic, or through the Facebook, or subscribe to my mailing list and get sort of more detailed information, helps and hints on AI as a teacher. Till then, take care of yourself.